A simple visit to a small-town diner spirals into humiliation when a black man is falsely accused of using counterfeit money. In front of dozens of silent witnesses, the police are called, and the confrontation escalates quickly. But the accused remains unnervingly calm. A single sentence from him shatters the illusion of power, setting the stage for a devastating reveal. "We've had trouble with people like you before." The words sliced through the diner like a dirty knife. Heads turned, some quickly looking away, pretending to stir their coffee, pretending not to hear. The waitress, a young, freckled woman with trembling hands, clutched the $20 bill like it might burn her fingers. Outside, the sun baked the cracked parking lot. Inside, the old clock ticked too loudly. Smell of grease and burnt. Bacon lingered heavy in the air. A couple in the corner froze mid-bite. A little boy dropped his crayon onto the table. Silence pressed against the grimy windows. Two officers stood near the door, deputies Mason and Hall. One leaned on his belt, thumb casually brushing against the edge of his holstered weapon. The other folded his arms across a beer belly hardened by years of smug authority. Their badges caught the light like knives. They didn't ask. They demanded, "Stand up, show us some ID." The man seated at the counter, tall, broad-shouldered, skin the color of rich mahogany, didn't flinch. He wore a plain grey t-shirt and worn jeans. His boots were dusted with red dirt, the kind that clings to your soul out west. His hands rested calmly on the counter next to a half-eaten plate of eggs. He turned his head slowly, meeting the deputy's glare with a gaze so steady it made the younger officer hesitate. "I'm waiting on my breakfast," he said, voice low and even. Deputy Mason snorted. "You're lucky that's all you're waiting on." The waitress shifted awkwardly, looking from the man to the officers. She whispered, "I'm sorry, the money looks funny." Mason took the bill from her, waving it like a trophy. "Counterfeit, clear as day. You think you can stroll in here, play the hero and scam honest folk?" There was a rustle at the booths. Someone fumbled with their phone, but didn't dare raise it high. Others stared down at their plates. The cook peeked through the kitchen door, then quickly disappeared. The man stood up slowly, his full height casting a shadow over the counter. He pulled out his wallet, dropped another bill, crisp, clean, beside his plate. "Call the bank," he said softly. "Serial numbers are registered." Deputy Hall chuckled. "Oh, we'll call all right. We'll call backup too." Without warning, Mason grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it roughly behind his back, slamming him chest first onto the counter. Silverware rattled, plates clattered to the floor. The little boy whimpered. The man didn't resist, didn't struggle, just turned his head sideways, voice calm despite the cold metal snapping shut around his wrists. "You really should Google me," he said. The deputies laughed. The man smiled grimly. Outside, sirens wailed closer. Inside, reputations began to rot. And somewhere between the cracked tiles and the flickering neon sign, the tide had already begun to turn. The metal cuffs bit deep into his wrists, cold, tight, designed to humiliate, not restrain. Deputy Mason shoved him forward roughly. His boots scraped against the sticky linoleum floor. Someone's untouched coffee spilled as the diner door swung open, the bell overhead jangling like a nervous laugh. The sun hit hard outside, white-hot and unforgiving. It gleamed off the squad car's polished chrome and painted the cracked parking lot in brutal clarity. No shadows to hide in here, only open shame. The man stumbled but caught himself. He lifted his chin, refusing to hunch, refusing to give them the satisfaction. A few patrons had followed to the windows, faces pressed against the glass like timid moths. Some lifted their phones halfway but thought better of it. Others just watched, silent accomplices to injustice. "Name?" Mason barked, jerking the man's arms higher for the crowd to see. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A young woman in a denim jacket slipped out the diner's side door, phone raised discreetly. She angled it low. capturing the officer's aggression, the man's composure, the burning sun branding the scene into memory. Deputy Hall opened the back of the cruiser with an unnecessary flourish. "Let's see if you're still smug at county." Still, the man said nothing, his silence wrapped around him like armor. Every second that passed without his begging or explanation made the officers look smaller, pettier. Mason stuffed him into the back seat without ceremony, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Dust puffed up from the lot as the other. Deputy circled the car, peering through the window like inspecting a prize. Inside, the young woman in denim tapped "record," quietly, deliberately. Her name was Lacey Graham. Nobody knew her yet, but they would. In the squad car, the man leaned his head back against the cracked vinyl seat, feeling the rough stitching press into his scalp. His wallet sat on the front dash. Open, exposed. In clear view was a worn military ID, bronze star, Purple Heart, service ribbons that told stories neither of these men cared to hear, but the camera saw, and soon the world would too. Mason cranked the radio up, laughing as some country song about loyalty and brotherhood blared. The irony wasn't lost on the man. He closed his eyes briefly. Not in defeat, but calculation. They had no idea who they had cuffed, no idea what storm they had just summoned. The squad car jolted forward, spraying gravel as it peeled out of the diner lot. Behind them, the young woman's figure shrank smaller. In the rearview mirror, but her phone stayed pointed steady, recording, documenting, preparing. As the cruiser sped down the road, the man opened his eyes again, calm as ever, and he smiled, not for himself, but for what was coming next. The town of Red River Valley wasn't much more than a few blocks stitched together by cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts. A gas station, a barbershop, a diner, a bait shop, and a whole lot of silence, the kind of silence that wasn't peace. It was permission. Deputy Mason drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming tunelessly to the radio. Hall flipped. Through a clipboard filled with crumpled papers, already sketching out the story they'd tell. Counterfeit. Resisting arrest. Possible prior record. The lies scribbled themselves. In the back seat, the man watched the landscape blur past. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, bending the edges of reality. Faded American flags drooped from sagging porch beams. Plastic lawn ornaments, baked brittle under the sun. This wasn't about a $20 bill. It never was. It was about control. About reminding a man exactly where they thought he belonged. The cruiser took a hard right onto a narrow gravel road, dust billowing in their wake like a storm cloud. In the distance, the squat, windowless police station sat hunched like a bunker. No flags here. Just bare concrete and broken promises. Back at the diner, Lacey Graham stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the post button. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Uploading the video could mean trouble, could mean being shunned, could mean worse. She looked around. People were settling back into their booths, pretending nothing had happened, laughing too loud, clinking coffee cups, scraping forks against plates. Pretend harder, she thought bitterly. The manager, a pink-faced man named Roy with sweat stains under his arms, caught her eye and frowned, shaking his head subtly. Don't. She swallowed hard. In Red River Valley, justice wasn't written in law books. It was whispered over fences, cemented in Sunday sermons, and carved into the careful way people looked away. But she couldn't unsee it. The man's dignity, the officer's cruelty, the unspoken approval of everyone around her. She tapped post. The upload spun for a moment, as if the town itself was trying to hold it back. Then, video posted successfully. It was out now, like a match struck in dry grass. The cruiser bumped into the station parking lot. Mason yanked the door open and dragged the man out roughly. Hall unlocked the side door. No booking cameras here, no audio recordings. Just tired fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and cracked. Linoleum floors. Mason shoved him toward an empty cell without even a formal booking. No Miranda rights read, no paperwork filed. Sit tight, hero, Hall sneered, slamming the heavy door behind him. The man leaned against the wall, hands still cuffed behind him, head tilted back calmly. Outside, sirens cracked the air. Inside, the seeds of something bigger had already been sown, something the town couldn't silence this time. Not with whispers, not with threats, not even with fear. The video hit like a match to dry kindling. At first, just a few shares, locals who knew better than to say anything out loud, but couldn't resist an anonymous repost. A teenager tweeted it with a caption, "This ain't right." Then a journalist caught it, then another, and another. By the time the sun dipped below the hills, Jeddah Red River Valley was trending across the country. The diner's greasy neon sign, flickering the word "eat" into the dark, glowed in every news segment, every blog post, every furious Instagram story. The footage was raw, no cuts, no commentary. Just the image of a man being slammed against a diner counter, handcuffed, humiliated, all over a $20 bill. You could hear the waitress whisper, "I'm sorry." You could see the man stay calm as the officers escalated. You could watch the bystanders look away. There was no room for misunderstanding, no room for spin. The truth was blisteringly clear, and it was ugly. Inside the Red River police station, Deputy Mason paced like a caged dog. His face burned every time his phone buzzed with another angry notification. "Goddamn internet warriors," he muttered, slamming a fist against the desk. Deputy Hall wasn't much better. He had been refreshing Facebook every few minutes, watching the local community page explode with arguments. Some defended the deputies, others, too many, demanded answers. Sheriff Raymond Briggs finally stormed in around midnight, his belly stretching the buttons of his uniform shirt. "What the hell happened?" he barked, voice thick with panic. Mason started to speak, but Briggs cut him off with a slice of his hand. "I got the mayor calling me. I got the news media outside the county line. You two better pray this is nothing, or you're both done." Hall shifted nervously. "It's just a misunderstanding, Sheriff. He had a counterfeit bill." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "Did you verify it?" Mason opened his mouth, closed it. Sweat dotted his forehead. The sheriff looked between them like a man realizing he'd bet on the wrong horse. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "You didn't even verify it." He jabbed a finger toward the holding cells. "Get him out of here, quietly. No charges, no paperwork. This didn't happen." "But, sir," Mason protested weakly, "now—" In his cell, the man sat against the wall, eyes half closed, breathing slow and even. He could feel the walls trembling, the old system creaking under the pressure. They thought they could bury this. They didn't realize the world had already seen. The heavy door clanged open. Mason stood there, hand twitching on his belt. "You're free to go," he said stiffly. The man rose slowly, stretching out the stiffness in his shoulders. His wrists throbbed from the cuffs. His clothes were rumpled, but his dignity was intact. He stepped out of the cell without a word. Hall shoved a crumpled $20 bill into his chest. "Take your funny money and get the hell out." The man caught the bill in midair with 2 fingers, studied it, genuine, pristine. Of course it was. He slipped it back into his wallet without comment. As he turned toward the door, Mason barked, "Don't come back." The man paused, half-turned, and in a voice as calm as a midnight river, he said, "You'll be seeing me again." The door slammed behind him, but the sound wasn't final. It was only the beginning. Outside, the night air was thick and heavy. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes yipped, crickets chirped. The town was trying desperately to stay asleep, but it was too late. Lacey Graham sat parked across the street, phone clutched in her hand, heart racing. She watched the man step out into the darkness, free but far from safe. She didn't know who he was, not yet, but she knew he wasn't ordinary, and she knew, somehow, that Red River Valley was about to wake up to a very different kind of Morning, she pressed record again, just in case. As the man walked down the cracked sidewalk, past darkened shops and silent homes, his mind wandered to the past, to deserts where the sand could rip the flesh from your bones. To nights so cold your breath turned to ice before it left your lips. To brothers in arms who didn't look like him but would have died for him without hesitation. Medals, honors, decorations, all worthless in a place like this, all invisible under the wrong skin. But he wasn't here to remind them who he was. He was here to show them what they had become. And when the sun rose, it wouldn't be him standing trial, it would be the whole damn town. He walked steadily into the dark, toward war, toward justice, toward history. By sunrise, Red River Valley wasn't just a town. It was a headline. Satellite vans with spinning dishes clogged the diner parking lot. Reporters clutched microphones like weapons, battling for a clear shot of the squat police station. Bright camera lights turned the cracked sidewalks into a stage, and Red River Valley, once forgotten by the world, stood blinking in the harsh spotlight. Exposed, raw and trembling, Sheriff Briggs stood at the edge of the station entrance. Sweat rolling down his neck as he faced a sea of microphones. "We are conducting an internal review," he stammered, eyes flicking nervously toward the deputies behind him. "We take these allegations seriously." A journalist from a major network cut him off sharply. "Sheriff, why was no counterfeit charge filed? Why was the individual detained without verification?" Briggs opened his mouth, closed it, stammered. Another reporter pushed forward, voice urgent. "Were you aware that the man arrested is a decorated war veteran? Bronze Star, Purple Heart." A ripple of shock tore through the gathered crowd. The sheriff's face went slack. For a moment the town's long practice mask slipped, revealing the rot underneath. He mumbled something about needing more information, but nobody listened. The damage was done. In a small motel room on the outskirts of town, Lacey Graham sat cross-legged on a creaky bed, laptop open, fingers trembling over the keyboard. She hadn't meant for this to explode. But maybe it needed. She refreshed the news feed again. Breaking. Wrongful arrest in Red River Valley. Decorated veteran detained without cause. Below the headline, a picture. The man in uniform. Standing tall, rows of ribbons gleaming across his chest. Eyes steady. Shoulders squared, a caption beneath it. Sergeant Major Samuel Royce. 3 tours. Bronze Star for Valor. Purple Heart recipient. Lacey leaned back, staring at the screen. His name was Samuel Royce, and he wasn't just another victim. He was a symbol. Across the motel parking lot, in a battered old pickup truck, Samuel Royce watched the frenzy unfold. He sipped cheap black coffee from a paper cup, watching townsfolk dart nervously between parked cars, avoiding reporters like rats scurrying from light. He wasn't angry. Not. Yet anger was a weapon you saved for the killing blow. No, what he felt now was colder, sharper. Focus. He checked his phone. Messages flooded in from veterans groups, civil rights organizations, journalists. People wanted his story, but he wasn't ready to give it to them. Not yet. Timing was everything. He finished the coffee, crushed the cup in his fist and started. The engine. The war was just beginning. At the town hall, the mayor, a pudgy, red-faced man named Cal Strickland, called an emergency meeting. The council chambers were packed with local officials, police officers and trembling business owners. "This can't go on," Strickland barked, slamming a pudgy fist against the podium. "We have to control the narrative. We can't let outsiders dictate what happens here." Sheriff Briggs shifted uneasily. "What do you want me to do, Mayor? We can't just disappear it. The whole damn world's watching." Mason and Hall sat slouched at the back of the room, faces pale. Someone in the audience, a schoolteacher named Miss Harris, rose hesitantly. "Maybe if we just apologized." The mayor rounded on her, eyes bulging. "Apologize? That's an admission of guilt." Murmurs rippled through the room. Fear, anger, confusion. Nobody knew how to fight this kind of enemy because the enemy wasn't just Samuel Royce. It was the truth, and it was merciless. Outside, Samuel parked his truck, 2 blocks away from the chaos. He stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, adjusting the simple cap pulled low over his brow. No uniform, no medals, just a man. But every step he took sent a pulse through the town's brittle heart. He passed the barbershop, the hardware store, the church. People peered through blinds, some locked doors, some stared openly, defiant. He met every gaze with steady calm. The diner loomed ahead, its neon "Eat" sign flickering against the dawn. He pushed the door open. Conversation died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The same waitress from before stood behind the counter, her hands trembling visibly. Samuel walked slowly to the same stool he had occupied yesterday, sat down, ordered the same breakfast, 2 eggs, bacon, black coffee. His voice carried clear and calm through the diner. Nobody moved, nobody dared. The waitress nodded numbly, disappearing into the kitchen like a ghost. Samuel folded his hands on the counter, waiting, watching, daring them. He wasn't here for food. He was here for reckoning, and they knew it. At the police station, panic deepened. Sheriff Briggs cursed under his breath as a new video surfaced, footage of Samuel's battlefield heroism, spliced side by side with the footage of his wrongful arrest. It was devastating. It showed a man pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, shielding civilians with his own body, leading broken men home under gunfire. And now handcuffed over a $20 bill. The internet wasn't asking for answers anymore. It was demanding blood. Senators tweeted statements. Veterans organizations called for full investigations. High-profile lawyers offered free services. And someone, nobody knew who, had started a GoFundMe titled "Justice for Sergeant Major Samuel Royce." Within hours, it raised 6 figures, and it was still climbing. Briggs wiped sweat from his brow. "We're losing this town," he whispered. Deputy Hall finally broke. "I didn't know," he mumbled, voice cracking. "I didn't know who he was." Briggs rounded on him savagely. "That's the goddamn problem." In the diner, Samuel's breakfast arrived. He ate slowly, methodically, each bite deliberate, each sip of coffee measured. The tension thickened until it buzzed in the air. Finally, someone cracked, a rancher named Mike Rutherford, who had cheered the deputies the day before, slammed his mug down and stood. "You people act like he's some damn saint," he shouted. "He's just another troublemaker stirring up bad press." Samuel finished chewing his bacon, set the fork down, stood up, and for the first time he spoke not just to Mike, but to everyone. I bled for this country," he said, voice quiet but unyielding. "I buried brothers who never came home. I didn't ask for a parade. I didn't ask for thanks." He let the silence stretch, let it choke the room. "But I damn sure didn't fight for this." He tossed a crisp 20 on the counter, turned, and walked out the door without looking back. The bell jangled overhead, a soft, almost mournful sound. Outside, the reporters spotted him immediately. Questions flew like arrows. "Mr. Royce, how do you feel? Will you sue the department? Will you press charges?" He paused on the sidewalk, turned to face the cameras, and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knew the ground was shifting under their feet. "The truth," he said simply, "is heavier than any weapon." And then he walked away, leaving them scrambling in his wake, leaving them terrified, leaving them exposed. It started with one man. An old veteran named Walt Henderson stood at the courthouse. Steps with a hand-painted sign that simply read, "I served too." He didn't shout. He didn't chant. He just stood there, steady, unmoving. By noon, he wasn't alone. A retired teacher showed up next, clutching a faded flag from her son's funeral. Then a local nurse, tears staining her cheeks. Then a teenage boy who had never known war, but knew injustice when he saw it. By evening, the courthouse lawn was a sea of homemade signs, American flags, and anger. The town that prided itself on being good folk now found itself swallowed by the truth. And the world watched. Sheriff Briggs pulled the blinds shut with a snap. The chant outside grew louder, a rhythmic thud of footsteps and voices that seemed to shake the walls. Deputy Mason slumped in a chair, staring blankly at the floor. Hall paced the room like a rat in a trap. "This is bad," Hall muttered. Briggs rounded on him. "No kidding? We could resign," Mason offered weakly. Briggs barked a hollow laugh. "And admit we're guilty? No, we ride it out." "But the feds," Hall began. "The feds haven't said a damn thing yet," Briggs snapped. "And if we keep it quiet enough, they won't." A knock interrupted them. Not a reporter, not a protester. The mayor himself stormed in, face purple with rage. "You idiots have turned this town into a war zone." Mason opened his mouth, but the mayor cut him off. "Shut it. I don't want excuses. I want solutions." "There's nothing we can do," Hall said, voice cracking. "It's too late." Briggs clenched his fists. Maybe it was, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Not yet. Across town, Samuel Royce sat quietly at a battered picnic table in the city park. Children played obliviously nearby, swinging from rusted monkey bars. A dog barked happily, chasing a thrown stick. Life went on even here, especially here. He watched the news unfold on his phone, watched his own face flash across headlines. Decorated hero, wrongfully arrested, systemic racism in small-town America. A soldier's silent stand. He hadn't planned this, hadn't wanted it. But maybe it needed to happen. Maybe silence was a luxury they could no longer afford. A young woman approached. Lacey Graham, her camera slung nervously over her shoulder. She hesitated before sitting down across from him. "Mr. Royce," she began. "Samuel," he corrected gently. "Samuel," she repeated. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what they did, for what we didn't do." He nodded once. No anger, no bitterness, just tired understanding. "You didn't put the cuffs on me," he said. "But we watched," she whispered. He said nothing. The truth was heavy enough without more words. Finally, she found her courage. "I posted the video. I didn't know it would blow up like this." He studied her face. The guilt, the fear, the trembling hope. "You did the right thing," he said simply. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I want to help," she said. "You already did," he replied, but he saw the fire kindling behind her eyes. Maybe she wasn't done yet. Maybe none of them were. By nightfall, the protests swelled beyond the courthouse lawn. Marches snaked down Main Street, blocking traffic. Chants filled the night. "Justice for Samuel. We serve too. No more silence." Townsfolk, who had once prided themselves on polite indifference, now faced a mirror they couldn't turn away from. Veterans rolled up in wheelchairs, church groups linked arms with high school students, shopkeepers closed early to join the crowd. The old divisions crumbled under the harsh glare of the truth. Red River Valley looked very different, very human, very broken, very real. Inside the mayor's office, panic reached a fever pitch. "They're calling for a federal investigation," Strickland roared, waving a sheaf of printouts. "DOJ's getting involved. We're finished if they find anything." Mason's face went pale. Hall swallowed hard. Briggs slammed his hands on the desk. "Nobody talks to the feds," he ordered. "No interviews, no statements, stonewall everything. But if they find the body cam footage—" Mason started. Briggs fixed him with a murderous glare. "There is no body cam footage," he growled. Mason flinched, because there was footage that showed the rough arrest. The unnecessary force, the smirks, the threats, footage that could end all of them. And now it wasn't just about surviving public outrage. It was about staying out of prison. At the edge of town, Samuel watched the bonfire protests flare against the night sky. He didn't hold a sign. He didn't lead chants. He simply stood among them, a soldier, a witness, a reminder. He caught glimpses of the faces around him, a young black boy clutching his father's hand, an elderly white woman with a Justice for All shirt, a teenager live-streaming the march. They didn't know each other, but tonight they stood together. The enemy wasn't just Red River Valley. It was the idea that silence was safer than truth. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds wash over him, the stomping feet, the shouted slogans, the heartbeat of a town waking up. When he opened them again, he saw a news van pull up. A national anchor emerged, microphone already in hand. They would want an interview, a soundbite, a hero's quote. But Samuel Royce wasn't a symbol. He was a man with scars the cameras couldn't see, a man who had fought too many wars already. He turned away from the cameras, walked deeper into the crowd, let them tell their story, let them carry the fire. It was theirs now. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, mocked, doubted, and it would burn until the lies turned to ash. Far away, in a sleek Washington, D.C. office, a woman in a sharp suit clicked on the video of Samuel's arrest. Her jaw tightened. Her phone buzzed. She answered curtly. "Open a case," she ordered. "Full federal investigation, effective immediately." Justice wasn't a promise anymore. It was a countdown, and it had already begun. The black SUVs rolled into Red River Valley like a thunderstorm. No sirens, no flashing lights, just grim-faced federal agents in dark suits, armed with subpoenas instead of guns. It was morning, but the town already felt bruised and battered. Signs of the protests still littered the courthouse lawn. Broken sticks, torn banners, discarded coffee cups. Sheriff Briggs stood on the station steps, sweat gleaming on his brow despite the cool air. Behind him, Deputies Mason and Hall fidgeted, like schoolboys caught cheating. The lead federal agent, a tall woman named Special Agent Rebecca Lynn, stepped out of the first SUV. She moved like a blade. No wasted motion, no patience for nonsense. "Sheriff Briggs," she said coolly, "by order of the United States Department of Justice, this station and all related personnel are now under formal investigation for civil rights violations, unlawful detention, and obstruction of justice." The cameras caught every word. Briggs opened his mouth to protest, but Agent Lynn simply handed him a thick folder, the warrant, official, irrevocable, game over. Briggs sagged visibly. Hall looked like he might puke. Mason just stared, blank-eyed at the horizon. The old rules, the ones they had lived by for decades, had just been burned to ash, and there was no rebuilding from here. Samuel Royce watched the scene unfold from across the street, leaning against the hood of his battered pickup, arms crossed. No sign, no chant, no smile, just presence, solid, unshakable. He could hear the town whispering. "He's the reason the feds are here. He brought them down on us. He ruined everything. He didn't care. He hadn't ruined anything. He had just peeled back the rotten skin, exposing what had been festering underneath all along." Samuel had fought wars overseas. He recognized enemy territory when he saw it. And now, the battle had come home. Inside the station, chaos reigned. Agents swarmed over desks, collecting files. Hard drives, bodycam footage. Hall tried to slip away toward the back door, but two agents intercepted him neatly. "Sit down," one of them ordered, voice flat. Mason, cornered near the break room, babbled about misunderstandings and good intentions. Nobody listened. Nobody cared. Intentions didn't matter, only actions. Sheriff Briggs clung to his office like a ship captain refusing to believe the water was already at his throat. But Agent Lynn didn't bother arguing with him. She simply pointed. Two agents moved in, cuffing him in front of the entire department. The clicks of the handcuffs echoed like gunshots. The sheriff's face turned a mottled purple. "You can't do this," he roared. Lynn met his fury with ice. "We already have." They marched him through the front doors, past the cameras, past the protesters, past Samuel Royce standing silent across the street. It was Briggs' turn to be paraded. Like a criminal, it was Briggs' turn to be small. The old guard had fallen, and the new reckoning had only just begun. At Town Hall, Mayor Strickland raged behind closed doors. "We're being slaughtered in the media," he thundered. "This town's reputation is finished." The remaining council members sat in sullen silence. There was no defending it, not after the footage, not after the DOJ, not after Samuel Royce's face had been broadcast into every living room in America. One councilwoman, Evelyn Jacobs, a sharp-eyed widow who had lived through the civil rights era, stood up slowly. "Maybe it's not the media killing this town," she said. "Maybe it's us." Strickland gaped at her. "You take that back," he bellowed, but Evelyn only shook her head sadly. "You can't take back the truth." She walked out of the meeting without another word. One by one, others followed, leaving the mayor shouting into an empty room, powerless, alone, broken. At the diner, business ground to a halt. Locals either avoided it like the plague or came only to whisper bitterly into their coffee cups. The waitress, the one who had called the cops on Samuel, quit without notice, packing her things into a battered sedan and disappearing down the highway. She left behind an envelope addressed to Samuel. Inside was a handwritten note. "I'm sorry. I was scared. I was wrong." Samuel found it sitting on the counter when he returned briefly that afternoon. He read it once, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his wallet beside his military ID. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't immediate. But maybe, just maybe, it started with acknowledgement. Outside the town limits, national news anchors set up gleaming tents. One channel framed the shot with the "Eat" sign flickering in the background. Another parked directly across from the police station, catching every agent walking in and out. Commentators debated on split screens, systemic injustice or isolated incident. Can Red River Valley recover? What does justice look like? But no matter how they spun it, no matter what words they used, the truth remained. Samuel Royce had changed the town forever, whether they liked it or not. That night, under a bruised purple sky, Samuel drove out to the old war memorial at the edge of town. It was small, just a cracked marble slab and a few weather-worn plaques. He stood before the names etched into stone, names of boys who had died believing in something better, something worth fighting for. He traced one name with a calloused finger: Matthew Tex Davidson, an old friend, killed by an IED in a dusty nowhere corner of the world. Samuel closed his eyes, remembering the dirt, the blood, the desperate pull of broken bodies from burning wreckage. He had fought so hard for a country that saw only the color of his skin, fought so hard for a town that still flinched at the sight of him. But he didn't regret it, not a single moment, because this, standing here, witnessing the fall of the old lies, this was part of the fight too, maybe the hardest part. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled apology note, held it over the flame of his lighter until it caught fire. The paper curled, and, blackened ash drifting into the night air, he watched it burn, watched it vanish, and when the last ember died, he straightened his shoulders. Tomorrow would come, and with it, real battles, court hearings, testimonies, investigations. But for tonight he allowed himself a small, fierce peace. He had survived worse. He had survived war. He could survive this, and he wouldn't do it alone. Across the darkened fields, he could hear the faint echo of chants still rising from the courthouse steps. Justice for Samuel. Justice for all. A storm was coming, and Samuel Royce would meet it head-on, not as a symbol, not as a victim, but as a man who refused to kneel to fear. Not then, not now, not ever. The microphones thrust forward like bayonets. Cameras blinked and buzzed. Journalists shouted questions, waving notepads and recorders, their faces flushed with urgency. The courthouse steps had become a battleground, and at the center stood Samuel Royce, still, steady, immovable. He wore no suit, no uniform, no medals. Just a simple dark jacket, jeans and boots scuffed from long battles. A deep hush fell over the crowd as he stepped up to the small podium hastily erected by his legal team. The weight of a nation balanced on his shoulders. Samuel adjusted the microphone, looked out over the sea of flashing cameras and tear-streaked faces, and spoke. "I didn't come here to destroy this town," he began, voice steady but filled with steel. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to eat breakfast." The words struck like hammer blows, simple, devastating, true. He let the silence settle, it soak deep into the bones of every listener. "This isn't just about me," he continued, gaze sweeping the crowd. "It's about every person who's been told they're less than human. It's about every voice that's been silenced, every life that's been devalued." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. Veterans in faded uniforms stood at attention. Mothers clutched their children closer. Teenagers filmed on shaking phones, their faces set with fierce pride. "I fought for the freedom of this country," Samuel said. "Not just for some, for all." He paused, letting the words carve themselves into the morning air. "I still believe in that fight." He stepped back. No slogans, no political party, no grandstanding, just truth. And somehow that was louder than any chant or marching drum. The crowd erupted, not with chaos, but with applause, thunderous, deafening, liberating. Samuel stood quietly, letting it wash over him, letting them take. The torch he had carried alone for far too long. Within hours, lawsuits flooded Red River Valley, civil rights violations, wrongful arrest, malicious prosecution. The Department of Justice formally charged Sheriff Briggs with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. Deputies Mason and Hall faced separate charges, use of excessive force and false imprisonment. Federal grand jury was convened. The internet celebrated every update like battle victories, hashtags multiplying by the second. Justice for Samuel should truth marches on. There's Red River. Reckoning law firms across the country offered free representation to any citizen who had suffered mistreatment under Briggs' regime. Whistleblowers emerged like mushrooms. After rain, clerks, clerics, teachers, all sharing dark stories they had buried for years. The truth was a tidal wave now, and Red River Valley had no defenses left. Mayor Strickland tried to hold a press conference that afternoon. He lasted exactly 3 minutes, booed offstage, chased back into City Hall by angry townsfolk waving protest signs and legal subpoenas. His career, like his reputation, lay in smoking ruins. Evelyn Jacobs, the councilwoman who had dared to speak the truth, was quietly nominated as interim mayor within days. Change wasn't coming. It had arrived, and it wore no compromise. Back at the diner, a group of local kids repainted the faded "Eat" sign, not to erase the shame of the past, but to claim something better. They added a second sign below it in bold black letters, "Equality served here." Samuel drove past it later that evening, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't stop, didn't need to. The message wasn't for him. It was for the next man who walked through those doors, the next woman, the next child. It was for a future he had helped crack open, even if he never sat under that sign himself, and that was enough. Inside a cramped law office 2 towns over, Samuel met with his new legal team, not to sue for money, though he could have bankrupted Red River Valley twice over. No, Samuel's demands were different, simple, uncompromising. Public apologies from the town leadership, formal resignations from Briggs, Mason and Hall, permanent reforms in the police department, mandatory bias training, body cameras, citizen review boards, and perhaps most important, an official memorial at the courthouse steps, not for him, but for all victims of injustice in the town's history, a place where no one could pretend ignorance again. The lawyers looked at him, astonished. "You could own half this town," one whispered. Samuel shook his head. "I don't want to own it," he said. "I want it to own itself." News vans still camped on the outskirts. The media begged for exclusive interviews, book deals, movie rights. Samuel declined them all. He wasn't a brand. He wasn't a martyr. He was a man who refused to bend. And that refusal had set something unstoppable into motion. One reporter, more persistent than the rest, finally caught him walking out of the law office. "Mr. Royce," she called breathlessly, "do you have anything else to say to the people of Red River Valley?" Samuel paused, turned. The sunset framed him in gold and crimson, a warrior silhouette against the dying light. He considered the question, and then he said quietly, "See each other." Simple, unforgettable. The reporter blinked, stunned. Samuel walked on, leaving them chasing his shadow. In the courthouse, Agent Lynn oversaw the beginning of jury selection for Briggs's upcoming trial. She moved efficiently, surgically, her team peeling back layers of corruption like rotten onion skins. For once, justice didn't creak forward reluctantly. It stormed, and Samuel's presence hung over every proceeding like a silent oath. The town had changed. It would never be the same. It would never forget, and if it ever dared to try. There were thousands, millions, who had seen what happened here, who would not allow it to happen again. The cracks had been permanent. The old structures had collapsed, and from the rubble, something stronger, something cleaner was beginning to rise, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary, because silence was no longer an option. Not here, not ever again. The courthouse buzzed like a hornet's nest. Security guards scanned every pocket, every bag, every nervous handshake. Reporters jockeyed for position behind red velvet ropes. Protesters swirled outside, chanting and waving homemade signs under a merciless sun. Inside, the heavy air tasted of sweat, coffee, and fear. This was no longer about one man. This was about every buried injustice Red River Valley had thought would stay hidden forever, and the reckoning had come. Sheriff Briggs sat at the defense table, jaw clenched, cheeks mottled red and white. His lawyers, two slick men in expensive suits imported from the state capital, whispered furiously into his ears, but Briggs barely heard them. He stared across the room at the jury being seated, 12 ordinary citizens, none of them smiling. None of them cowed. Across from him, Samuel Royce sat quietly beside the prosecutors. No anger, no smugness, just a calm, steady presence that spoke louder than any shout. It infuriated Briggs more than any insult ever could, because Samuel didn't have to shout to condemn him. His existence alone was the indictment. Opening arguments began. The lead prosecutor, a wiry man named Delgado, rose with slow, deliberate steps. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice low but cutting, "you will hear a story today, a story about power abused, about trust shattered, about a man who fought for this country, only to be shackled and humiliated in the town he tried to believe in." He paused. Let the silence settle heavy. You will hear the defense try to spin, try to excuse, try to distract. Another beat. But the truth is simple. You will see it, you will feel it, and you will know. He turned slightly toward Samuel, and knowing, Delgado said softly, you will have no choice but to act. The words rippled across the courtroom, settling into the jury like seeds finding fertile soil. The defense attorneys rose next, smoothing their ties, flashing polished smiles. They tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a mistake made under pressure, good officers trying to protect their community. "But let us not rush to judgment," one of them intoned solemnly. "Let us remember that sometimes even heroes make mistakes." Samuel watched without expression, because they were right. Heroes made mistakes, but cowardice wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and Red River Valley had chosen wrong for far too long. The first witnesses took the stand. The waitress from the diner, hands trembling as she admitted she never verified the bill before calling the police. The restaurant owner, voice cracking as he confessed to lying about seeing Samuel acting suspicious. A young man who had filmed part of the incident on his phone, his footage showing clearly the officer's aggressive behavior. Piece by piece, the prosecution built the scaffolding, and piece by piece, the defense scrambled to tear it down. But the walls were closing in, and everyone could feel it. Finally, the moment everyone had waited for. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the state calls Sergeant Major Samuel Royce to the stand." Every head turned, every breath held. Samuel rose from his seat and walked to the witness stand with the same measured steps he had once used crossing. Minefields, unshakable, unbreakable. He was sworn in, sat down, faced the courtroom. The prosecutor approached, gentle but firm. "Sergeant Major Royce," he said, using the title with clear respect. "Can you describe, in your own words, what happened the morning of your arrest?" Samuel took a breath, closed his eyes briefly, and then opened them, steady and sure. "I went to eat breakfast," he said. "No drama, no embellishment, just truth. I ordered eggs, bacon, and coffee. I paid with a $20 bill." The waitress looked nervous. "Next thing I knew, 2 deputies were in my face, accusing, shoving, cuffing." He paused. The courtroom hung on every word. "I didn't resist," Samuel continued. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone." His voice stayed calm, but his eyes burned. "And still they slammed me against the counter, handcuffed me, dragged me through that diner like an animal." A collective flinch ran through the room. The prosecutor nodded. "And did you, at any point, present false identification or resist lawful orders?" "No," Samuel said, simple, final. The defense attorney rose, tried to rattle him, tried to twist his words. "Isn't it true," the attorney sneered, "that you could have de-escalated the situation by immediately identifying yourself as a decorated war veteran?" Samuel tilted his head slightly. "I didn't know that being a veteran was supposed to buy me basic respect," he said quietly. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney paled. The judge banged her gavel once, restoring order. Samuel looked straight at the jury. "I shouldn't have to earn dignity," he said. "It should be given to everyone." He stepped down from the stand. The prosecutor didn't bother calling any more witnesses. They didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken, and there was no unhearing it. That evening, the courthouse steps became a gathering place again. Not for anger, but for hope. Veterans in full-dress uniforms saluted Samuel as he walked past. Children held signs reading "Thank you" and "Justice for all." Old men tipped their hats. Mothers clutched their babies tighter. Strangers nodded silently, acknowledging the man who had refused to bow. Samuel accepted it all with quiet grace. Not because he needed their thanks, but because maybe, just maybe, they needed to give it, to heal, to grow, to change. Inside a dim bar on the edge of town, Briggs drank alone. His badge had been stripped, his reputation shattered, and tomorrow, when the jury delivered its verdict, it would be the final nail. He stared into his drink, seeing nothing, hearing only the words. Samuel had spoken. "I didn't come here to destroy. I came here to eat breakfast, simple, unforgiving, final." Briggs slammed his glass down, the sound hollow and empty. There was no escaping now, no bargaining, no spinning, only consequences. And tomorrow they would come crashing down like a hammer. Across town, Samuel sat quietly in his truck, parked at the War Memorial again. He wasn't afraid of the verdict. He had already won, not because the system had finally bent toward justice, but because the people had, the crowd, the jurors, the town itself. A slow, painful awakening, but an Awakening nonetheless. He looked up at the dark sky, stars winking through the haze. Somewhere out there, his fallen brothers were watching. He hoped they were proud. He hoped they knew the fight hadn't been in vain. And as the courthouse lights, if the jury was back, the clerk's voice cracked slightly as she announced it. Inside the courtroom, the air thickened until it felt like breathing molasses. 12 faces filed solemnly back into the box, their expressions unreadable. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Justice Monroe, nodded curtly. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged mechanic named Carl Jensen, rose to his feet, a folded piece of paper in his hand. We have, Your Honor. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the cameras stopped flashing. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff Briggs sat stiffly at the defense table, hands clenching and unclenching under the polished surface. Deputy Mason shifted beside him, face pale as chalk. Hall didn't even look up from his lap. Samuel Royce sat still, unmoving. No prayer, no visible hope, only steady readiness. Justice didn't come from wishing, it came from fighting. The clerk unfolded the paper. Read aloud, on the charge of unlawful. Detention, guilty. A gasp rippled through the room. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. Briggs flinched like he'd been punched. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty. The last words echoed against the marble walls, bouncing off stained glass and worn oak. Guilty. 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 The foreman's voice was steady, certain. No doubt. No compromise. The judge nodded gravely. She turned her hard gaze on Briggs, Mason, and Hall. Gentlemen, she said, voice cutting through the heavy silence like a scalpel. You have betrayed the oath you swore. You have betrayed the people you swore to protect. She paused. Sentencing will follow. Until then, you are remanded into federal custody without bail. The bailiffs moved in, swift and silent. Briggs snarled as they cuffed his wrists. This isn't justice, he spat, struggling as flashbulbs popped like fireworks. Samuel simply watched, unblinking, because he knew better. This wasn't revenge, this was consequence, and consequence didn't care how loudly you screamed. Outside the courthouse, the crowd exploded into cheers. The courthouse steps became a river of raised fists, tear-streaked faces and singing. Old men embraced teenagers. Veterans in wheelchairs waved tiny flags. Mothers sobbed openly, clutching signs tight to their chests. It wasn't just about Samuel anymore. It was about all of them, about every silence finally broken, about every small voice finally heard. The bells atop City Hall began to ring, awkward, rusty, joyous, an imperfect sound for an imperfect victory, but a victory nonetheless. Inside, the defense lawyers packed their briefcases with trembling hands. They didn't meet Samuel's eyes, didn't dare. The prosecutor shook Samuel's hand. Firmly, no words needed. Justice Monroe offered a slight, rare smile. Thank you, Sergeant Major Royce, she said quietly, for your service, both on the battlefield and here. Samuel nodded once, then turned, walked through the double doors, and out into the brilliant, blinding afternoon. Into history. Lacey Graham found him first. The young woman who had filmed the original footage, who had sparked this entire reckoning without knowing it. She stood breathless among the crowd, camera forgotten at her side. Samuel paused before her. She swallowed hard, trying to find words. She stammered. I'm proud of you. Samuel gave her a small, tired smile. I'm proud of you too, he said simply. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Around them, the crowd chanted his name, but Samuel barely heard it. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a saint. He was a man who had refused to kneel, and now the world stood, taller because of it. The mayor, Strickland, resigned quietly that evening, releasing a hollow statement about personal reflection and healing. Nobody cheered, nobody protested, nobody cared. His reign had ended the moment he chose fear over courage. History would remember him, and not kindly. Evelyn Jacobs, sworn in under the battered old flag, promised sweeping reforms. Body cameras for every officer, mandatory bias training, citizen oversight boards, public apologies to victims, living and dead. It wasn't enough to heal all wounds, but it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered. That night, the town square transformed into something beautiful. Children chalked murals onto the concrete, hearts, fists, faces of every color. Local musicians played guitars and fiddles under strings of mismatched lights. Families picnicked on the courthouse lawn. Old grudges melted in the glow. For the first time, Red River Valley wasn't pretending to be whole, it was fighting to become it, and that made all the difference. Samuel stood at the edge of it all, arms crossed, watching the slow, painful, glorious rebirth. A reporter approached cautiously, microphone lowered respectfully. "Mr. Royce," she said softly, "what will you do now?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Live," he said, simple. True, he wasn't here to lead them. He wasn't here to haunt them. He was here to live his life, free and unafraid, the greatest victory of all. Later, as the stars blinked awake overhead, Samuel walked back to the war memorial. The stone slab still bore the same old names, still bore the same old pain. But tonight, he brought something new. A small, hand-carved wooden plaque he had made himself. He knelt, brushing dust from the base of the memorial, set the plaque gently down, on it just 4 words, "In honor of all." No names, no ranks, no colors, just a promise, a prayer, a vow. He stood back, surveying it, satisfied, complete. Then he turned and walked away, toward the town he had changed, toward the future he had carved from blood and silence, toward the life he had earned. And as he disappeared into the dark, the stars above Red River Valley seemed to shine just a little brighter, not because the town was perfect, but because it was trying, because it had seen itself, truly seen and chosen to rise, because one man had refused to lower his head, and because sometimes that was enough to change everything. Liquored off one by one, Samuel Royce leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and allowed himself, for the first time in a long time, a moment of quiet peace. Tomorrow would bring judgment, but tonight belonged to the truth, and truth had already won. The courthouse lawn smelled of fresh-cut grass and new beginnings. White folding chairs lined the green, forming neat rows that glowed under the mid-morning sun. American flags fluttered at half-mast. Hand-painted banners waved in soft breezes. Simple messages inked by calloused hands. Honor all. Dignity without conditions. Justice is owed, not earned. At the center of it all stood a brand-new monument, a smooth marble slab taller than a man, etched with a single phrase, "Truth carves freedom." No names, no blame, just the truth. And that, finally, was enough. Samuel Royce sat in the front row, stiff-backed but relaxed, arms folded lightly over his chest. He wore his simple jacket and jeans again, refusing all offers to dress up. No medals, no speeches prepared, no script, only presence, only honesty. That was all he had ever needed. The interim mayor, Evelyn Jacobs, approached the podium slowly, her every step weighted by history. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and began. "This town was built on silence," she said, voice strong despite the tremble beneath. "But today we speak." The crowd murmured approval. He didn't grant interviews, didn't sign book deals, didn't cash in on his name. He let the town breathe on its own, grow on its own, because real change couldn't be chained to one man's shoulders. It had to belong to everyone, or it belonged to no one. Samuel spent his days working at the local Veterans Center, a small, crumbling brick building 2 streets over from the courthouse. He didn't run it, didn't want to. He just showed up, helped patch holes in the roof, painted peeling walls, sat quietly with men and women whose ghosts didn't always let them sleep at night. No uniforms, no medals, just presence, just solidarity. Some battles you didn't fight with fists, some you fought simply by refusing to leave. One afternoon, as autumn crept into the valley with gold-tipped leaves and crisp air, Samuel sat on the cracked front steps of the center, a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hands. Lacey Graham pulled up in a battered sedan, camera equipment piled messily. In the back seat, she approached shyly, hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Samuel nodded, moving over slightly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching leaves dance across the street like reckless children. Finally, Lacey broke the quiet. "I'm thinking of starting something," she said. He arched, an eyebrow in quiet encouragement. "A community project," she continued, voice picking up strength. "Storytelling workshops, giving people a chance to tell their truth before someone else twists it." Samuel sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Sounds like a fight worth joining," he said. She smiled, the kind of smile that hinted at late nights, stubborn work, and fragile hope. The best kind of battles. Across town, the diner bustled with new life. Tourists snapped photos of the "Equality Served Here" sign. Locals sat side by side, arguments about old grudges replaced with cautious conversations about futures. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes voices still rose too sharp. Sometimes old habits tried to claw their way back, but the difference was simple. Now people fought to do better. Now when someone spoke up, others listened. It wasn't utopia, it was real, and that made it stronger. The war memorial at the town's edge had changed too. Fresh flowers appeared regularly at its base, not just on national holidays, but on ordinary Wednesdays and rainy Sundays. Someone, no one knew who, added a second plaque beside Samuel's quiet tribute. It read, "Freedom Demands Witnesses," and beneath it, the names of other citizens who had suffered under the old system. Their stories had finally been told, their dignity reclaimed, their silence broken forever. One grey afternoon, as rain misted gently over the fields, Samuel visited the courthouse alone. The marble monument stood silent in the drizzle, raindrops tracing silver rivers down its surface. He laid a single white lily at its base. No speeches, no cameras, just memory, just gratitude, not for the pain, not for the battles, for the simple, stubborn fact that they had mattered, that the truth had mattered, that it still mattered. The interim mayor, Evelyn Jacobs, met Samuel near the monument. She carried a thin folder in her hands, papers protected, hung carefully from the rain. "I wanted you to see this first," she said, offering it to him. Inside were blueprints, new buildings, new community centers, scholarship funds named after fallen heroes, heroes who had once been invisible. Samuel flipped through the pages slowly. When he reached the end, Evelyn spoke softly. "We're naming the new public square after you." Samuel stiffened slightly. "I didn't do this alone," he said. Evelyn nodded. "We know," she smiled, "but someone has to remind us that standing matters, even when it's hard, even when you stand alone." Samuel closed the folder. "I don't need my name on anything," he said. Evelyn's smile didn't falter. "But we need it," she said, "for the ones who come after." Samuel considered that for a long, quiet moment, and then, slowly, he nodded. Not for pride, not for legacy, but because sometimes you left markers on the road for others to find when they were lost. Sometimes you left reminders that standing was always worth it, always. Winter crept into Red River Valley with long shadows and crisp nights. The protests faded, the cameras left, but the work continued, slow, painful, real. The veterans, Center expanded to include counseling for young activists. The diner started a scholarship fund for local kids. The courthouse installed permanent plaques outlining civil rights responsibilities for all public officials. Bit by bit, the town stitched itself back together. Different now, stronger, scarred, but beautiful because of it. One evening, Lacey hosted the first storytelling night at the town's new community center. Locals filled the folding chairs, young and old, black and white, rich and poor. Samuel stood at the back, arms crossed loosely, a small smile playing at his lips. One by one, townsfolk stepped up to the microphone, told their truths. Some stories were painful, some hopeful, all necessary, all human. Samuel stayed until the last. Voice faded, until the last folding chair scraped across the floor, until the last word hung trembling in the air, and then he stepped outside into the sharp night, drawing a deep breath. Hope hurt sometimes. Hope was work, but it was worth it. It always had been. It always would be. As he walked home under a sky littered with stars, Samuel felt something shift deep inside him. Not a burden lifting, not a battle ending, something quieter, something stronger. Peace. Not because the fight was over, but because he had chosen to keep fighting every day, in every small, stubborn, necessary way. The town of Red River Valley had scars now. Visible, permanent, proud. So did Samuel. They wore them the same way now. Not as shame, but as proof. Proof that standing mattered. Proof that silence could be broken. Proof that dignity wasn't something you begged for. It was something you demanded, something you defended, something you lived. Samuel looked up at the endless night sky, smiled, and kept walking, toward tomorrow, toward whatever fight waited next. Ready, always ready. Spring bloomed in Red River Valley with slow, careful hands. Dogwoods burst into white and pink explosions along the courthouse lawn. Children chased soccer balls across freshly mowed parks. New businesses opened on Main Street. A bookstore, a coffee shop, a small art gallery. The air smelled different now, less like old fear, more like new chances, more like hope. The memorial at the courthouse stood quiet, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. Fresh flowers adorned its base every day without fail. No schedule, no ceremony, just steady acts of remembrance. Tourists snapped pictures. Locals paused with bowed heads. Children traced their fingers over the words. Truth carves freedom. Somewhere along the line, it had stopped being about Samuel Royce. It had become about all of them. It had become about the future. Samuel stood near the edge of the town square, a canvas duffel slung over one shoulder, watching the town stir awake. He wore simple clothes, jeans, worn boots, a weathered jacket, no uniform, no fanfare. He had made his peace with Red River Valley, had stayed long enough to see it start to heal. Now it was time to move forward. He wasn't leaving in anger. He wasn't running from anything. He was stepping into whatever came next. Because standing wasn't just about one moment. It was about choosing every day to keep moving toward the light. Lacey Graham found him just as he was about to cross the street. "You're really going?" she asked slightly. Breathless, Samuel smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, "it's time." She kicked at a loose stone, struggling to find the right words. "Thank you," she finally said, voice thick with emotion. Samuel nodded once. "You're the ones who built this," he said. "I just reminded you it was possible." Lacey laughed through her tears. "You're a stubborn old man, you know that?" Samuel chuckled. "Takes one to recognize one." They hugged, brief, fierce, unspoken promises stitched between their shoulders. Then he pulled away, adjusting his duffel. Lacey called after him as he walked. "Hey, Samuel!" He turned slightly. "You ever coming back?" Samuel grinned. "Maybe," he said, "when you don't need me anymore." Then he tipped 2 fingers off the brim of his cap and walked on. At the Veterans Center, a new generation of volunteers had taken over. Young faces, hungry to learn, stubborn enough to fight. They didn't need Samuel hovering anymore. His work was done. His legacy lived in their stubborn, hopeful hands. Down at the diner, the "Equality Served Here" sign had been repainted again. Brighter, bolder. A small plaque beside the door now read, "In honor of standing tall, no name attached." Because it wasn't about who. It was about what. Standing, always. Standing. Samuel passed by the diner but didn't stop in. He had new places to see, new battles to witness, new truths to protect. But he paused for a moment outside the door, tipped his head in silent salute, then kept walking. Outside town, the fields stretched gold and green under a soft blue sky. Birds skimmed low over swaying grasses. Distant tractors rumbled like lazy thunder. The road ahead shimmered in the growing heat. Samuel adjusted his duffel on his shoulder, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. One step, then another, not running, not chasing, just moving. Toward whatever waited next, toward the unfinished work of building a better world, one town, one truth, one stubborn act of dignity at a time. Behind him, Red River Valley thrummed with life. Children learned the names of heroes who looked like them. Teachers taught real history, painful and proud. Officers wore new uniforms stitched with new promises. Neighbors spoke even when it was hard. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was better, and sometimes better was enough. Sometimes better was everything. As the town grew smaller in the distance, Samuel stopped briefly on a ridge overlooking the valley, pulled out an old worn notebook from his jacket pocket, flipped it open to a blank page, and in careful, steady letters wrote 4 words: stand, speak, heal, build. Then he tucked the notebook away and kept walking. Somewhere far off, another town waited, another silence festered, another battle whispered on the wind. Samuel wasn't naive. He knew the fight never truly ended, but he also knew the truth, knew the secret most men spent lifetimes trying to grasp. Victory isn't winning every war, it's refusing to surrender to the easy lie. It's standing even when you stand alone. It's believing that even broken places can bloom again. If someone, just one someone, dares to believe, it's possible. Samuel smiled to himself because he knew he could believe that. Always. As the sun climbed higher, the road stretched endlessly before him. Dust kicked up with each step. His boots wore new creases. His shadow stretched long behind him, stitched into the ground like a signature. He wasn't chasing glory. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was chasing the promise that truth was worth fighting for, even when it cost everything. Especially then. Back in Red River Valley, the bells at City Hall rang noon, clear, proud, hopeful. Children laughed in the park. Church choirs practiced songs of joy and protest side by side. Old men played chess under the courthouse oak. And somewhere near the war memorial, a little girl traced her fingers over the carved stone and whispered, "I'll stand too." A promise, a vow, a beginning. The legacy Samuel had fought for, the legacy he left behind, alive, unbreakable, endless. Far down the road, Samuel Royce walked on, and the world, battered but stubborn, walked a little taller because of him, because he stood, because he spoke, because he believed, because he never ever gave up, and because sometimes all it takes to change everything, is one man refusing to kneel, one man daring to believe the truth matters, one man chose to stand in the light and never backing down, not then, not now, not ever.